Before we get into how to work with the response data that you've collected, I want to give you 3 main tips on using forms to collect data for your spreadsheet. All right, and there's obviously more tips than this, but these are just 3 main tips that I think are the most important ones to keep in mind if you plan to work with the data you collect. The first is when you're asking for a name, whether it be the name of someone like a student, the name of a person filling out the form, it's best to ask for the first name and the last name as separate questions. In this example, the form is just asking for your name. And you can see in the response spreadsheet, for the most part, the form filler filled in the first and last name, but this student just typed in their first name. The second reason it is beneficial to ask for first name and last name separately is because then we can sort the list by last name. Here I can sort column B, but the issue I'll have is it's going to sort by first name, and that's not typically a way that I want to sort my data. Okay, to remedy this, I can duplicate this question, or I can add another question, and then I can make this say first name and my next question say last name. Second tip is to collect email addresses. You can see that this form is automatically collecting email addresses. To make sure that your form is collecting email addresses, go to Settings, and in the Responses area, make sure that Collect Email Addresses is on. Now, this is only for cases where you're actually trying to tabulate or compare data from various users or various names inputted into the form. If you're just having a form where you are collecting like survey data or just trying to gauge the climate and you want that to be anonymous, that's fine. But when you're actually trying to collect data that you want to work with, it's important to collect email addresses, and let me show you why. Okay, in this example, I'm collecting reading log data for students, and in my sheet, I'm taking this data and I'm using a formula to count the number of reading logs that students have completed. And you can see that I am counting the number of reading logs Brandon Walsh has completed by using a count if formula. So if in column B I see the name Brandon Walsh, I want that to be counted. But the issue is that when the students are typing their name, I get varied responses. So for example, Brandon Walsh here, he typed his first name and last name, but in this case, I just got a first name. And in this case, I got a first name, a last name not capitalized, and a trailing space, which only one of these instances matched my formula. By collecting the email address, I get a consistent data point. So I'm not relying on the student to type in their email address. They're logging in, or the form filler is logging in, and I'm getting a consistent piece of information that I can use to count. So if I tweak my formula, and then instead of counting by a data point that the student supplied, I can go by the email address. uwalsh@90210.com. And now you'll see that my data is correct. So collect email addresses, especially when you're working with students, because if you're using formulas or you're running queries, this is going to be how you get a consistent data point, unless you actually go in and take the time to copy the data and fix it and put it in the format you want. All right. The third tip that I have for you is to use what we call response validation. Response validation is when you set up rules for responses. So for example, you can get to data validation by clicking on a question and using the menu of options in the bottom right and selecting response validation. What you're doing is you're specifying the type of response you want. So in this case, I'm asking students, how many pages did you read this week? But you see that here, one student typed out the number, another student put half a chapter. I want to make sure that I'm getting a numeric answer. So Forms already kind of knows what I'm looking for here, but I want a number that maybe is between, let's say that I know it's unreasonable for my students to read any more than 100 pages in a week. I can say it's a number between 0 and 100. Or if I know that maybe I have older students and they're probably going to read, they might read a little bit more, I could just cover that by saying, 0 and 1,000. That way they have to put in a number here. So when the student goes to fill out that form and they type in, let's say they exaggerate, it tells them they need to have a number between 0 and 1,000. If they try to type in a number, they're going to be told this needs to be a number. Right, and you can use response validation in a variety of ways. So I can set a minimum length. So if I want to make sure I don't get an IDK here or like a one sentence response, I can set a minimum character count. So those are 3 tips for working with forms to collect spreadsheet data. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how to work with that response data once it is in your spreadsheet.